In moments with two of the legal experts worried about this development. But first, Trace Gallagher has more on why this.
Hey, Shannon, what the Department of Homeland Security is suggesting is that voting is as important to our country's long-term security and prosperity as having a functioning electric grid, telecom networks, and water treatment plants. So now, in the wake of cyber attacks on the Democratic National Committee and two state election databases, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson is considering asking that the election be declared a, quote, critical infrastructure. In other words, DHS would consider measures to stop voting machines around the country from being hacked on Election Day. But we don't have just one federal election system. Instead, there are some 9,000 jurisdictions across America that tally votes. And as more voting machines become automated, the more vulnerable we are to being hacked, possibly changing the outcome of an election. Now the White House has acknowledged the critical infrastructure designation for voting is getting a very hard look. Listen.
That's something that's being discussed by senior members of the President's national security team. We certainly will continue to work in coordination with state and local officials.
Just consider that during a 2012 pilot program aimed at testing online voting in Washington, researchers from the University of Michigan were able to hack into the government website so that every time a vote was cast, the Michigan fight song would play. Experts and some politicians say there is still a very big difference between the government saying it will secure online voting and actually doing it. Jen.
All right, is supposed to be an election process run by the states. I'm joined now by Ilya Shapiro, Senior Fellow in Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute, and John Yoo, former DOJ attorney and professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome to you both.
Good to be on. Thanks.
All right, Ilya, why should we care if the feds want to get more involved? They say they want to protect us. They want to make sure everything's okay. What are your concerns?
Well, look, there is no critical infrastructure clause in the Constitution, and anything the federal government does has to be based on constitutional authority. If the states want some sort of federal expertise or federal dollars for something, they might want to work that out. But the federal government, the Homeland Security Department, or any other part of it can't simply come in and say, for your own good or for our own good, we're going to take over this system.
Yeah, and Professor, if I remember back to law school, and I might have done some cheating and some studying today, but Article 1, Section 4, as I recall, gives the states the control over how elections are handled. And there are a lot of people who worry about the concentration of power at the federal level, and they're concerned about what they see may be another power grab here.
Yes, you're perfectly right, and you should have gotten an A in constitutional law because that's the exact provision at stake. The government may be right if it came to critical infrastructure of electrical grids or communication networks. But on the issue of elections, there's a specific constitutional provision, Article 1, Section 4, that says the time, places, and manners of elections are in the hands of the state legislatures. So in this one area, the federal government cannot act unless Congress passes an actual law or the states request help. So this is not like all those other critical networks that might be worth protecting because the states have a right guaranteed in the Constitution to protect their control of the electoral system.
Well, Ilya, you know that we've seen plenty of exercises of executive power by this particular administration. You and I have talked and watched them be litigated many times at the Supreme Court. They're not shy about going around Congress when they don't think Congress is getting on board with what they want to do.
Right. Again, it's the when Congress won't act, we will, somehow trying to arrogate to itself more and more power. And John, while you're fixing Shannon's transcript from law school, I hope you can do mine as well. Because, look, this is not just simple technical academic-y stuff. The reason that there's a good reason to have dispersed power over these sorts of things. If we have these 9,000 different kinds of election tallying systems, well, then hackers, it's that much harder for them to control the election. If instead they can just hack into the back door of DHS, as has been done with DHS personnel files, and take over the whole election, that's much more problematic than whatever perceived issue DHS is now, the government is acting unconstitutionally, potentially, to intervene on.
And Professor, I'll give you the final word here on how you think this shakes out.
Well, I think, or I hope, that the federal government Although I think it's a good idea to stop the Michigan fight song from ever being played.
Agreed.
I
Agreed.
think we can all agree on that, no matter what law school we went to. But the important thing is that I agree with Ilya. The nature, it's not just the technology involved. The beauty of our Constitution is creating a decentralized federalist government, and that means it's harder to attack for a hacker. It means our system is more resilient, but that's because it's hardwired into our Constitution by our framers to over 200 years ago.
All right, gentlemen, very informative and I would argue entertaining. Great to see you both.
Thanks, Shannon.